As a guest on the Muay Thai Guys podcast, one question Paul Banasiak asked me was, a lot of people have a lot of hip flexor issues. Those were a lot of the questions that I was getting before the podcast. How do you solve hip flexor problems? Talking about hip mobility itself, what programming do you add to help with mobility? And I've since been asked if I can post a video going into detail on the routine that I spoke of in my answer on the podcast. If you can't sit down with your backside on your heels and rest backwards with your elbows on the floor, or you're feeling any discomfort in your knee or lower back, or generally just feel that your kicks are sluggish, then you need this in your training program. So here it is, my release, open and anchor sequence for the hip flexors. So we're going to do some release work now onto your quads and hip flexors. And we're going to use the tack and stretch method again. So I can use all manner of implements to do this. A smaller ball, more like a sort of lacrosse ball size there. A larger medicine ball if you want to use that, or foam roller. Okay, so I'm going to go with that because it's a bit easier to demonstrate on for now. So I'll just move these out of the way for a moment. Okay, so I'm going to get you to I'll do it kind of facing around this way. I'm going to position myself over on top of this now, and I'm going to roll into this pocket around just above the kneecap. So this tends to get quite tight, quite junky in here. So we're going to get this to release off and gradually just work up through the thigh. So if I start down on the inside there, and then what I'm going to do is just work into it, roll it, and I'm going to find some little tender points in here. And what I'm going to do is just kind of windscreen wiper from side to side here, to pick up, to really find those areas I can feel tightness and soreness. And then when I find a good bit there, I'm just going to flex and extend. Just generally work the muscle tissue, shorten and lengthen it over those hot spots. Gradually work through the muscle here. Get through into it, keep some pressure on it. And again, if I find some good spots there, just going to flex and extend. So what we want to be careful of, incidentally, I want to be making sure I'm working into muscle tissue. That's something we can affect a change with. If I go into the IT band down the outside of my leg here, it's basically just a big bit of gristle. And it's going to feel tender and sore if I roll into that, but I'm not going to change the condition of that tissue. You know, if you're rolling gristle, you're not going to change it at all. So I just want to be making sure I'm going into muscle tissue. So I'm better off actually working into the hamstrings and the quads either side of the IT band to get that to release off, rather than rolling the IT band itself. So that line that runs down the outside of your thigh here, just stay away from that. Keep into the front here in this instance, and work all the way up as high as you can into the hip, just making sure you don't hit anything, don't pinch anything that you shouldn't be, but roll into it and then just working on lengthening and shortening that muscle. Okay, so we're getting to get that tissue to release off. And of course you're going to work that onto the other side as well. Just sort of 1 to 2 minutes, that sort of typical amount. For the hip flexor band distraction, we're going to again start with a continuous loop resistance band and loop it through itself through a rack or something stationary so we can anchor ourselves to it. And the position of this is a little higher, so we're sort of pulling upward a bit as well. And if I'm going to step myself down into this, take that up nice and high, make sure you don't pinch anything, but nice and high up behind your glute here. Then I'm going to step myself back, give myself a decent tension here, so it's pulling my hip forwards. And then I'm going to make sure that rather than arching my backside out here, I'm actually tucking my tail under. That automatically puts a bit more tension here onto the hip flexor. And then from this position here, I'm going to pulse forwards, and I'm effectively trying to drive my hip in front of my knee here. So keeping myself tucked, not getting into this extension here, keep it tucked, drive forwards, and it's a mobile, a dynamic movement here where I pulse forwards and I'm squeezing my glute to help me keep my tail under, so I'm not sort of getting into this kind of position here. So I'm pushing through, pushing my hip forwards as I drive through, and I'll kind of explore a bit here with the positions, kind of push my hip out a little bit, push it across. I'm hunting into that all the time. I'm squeezing my glute to drive myself forwards and not arching too much into my lower back, making sure this is happening from the hips. And I'm going to explore that. I could even take my arm up overhead if I wanted to, but again, I'm tight here in the core, not sort of getting into this arching here, and I'm squeezing through. And I do that for about a minute or two, and that's how you'd actually work that position. So that's the band hip distraction. The rear foot elevated split squat, we need to make sure we get the feet in the right place. Otherwise the balance is going to be off, but also we won't be loading the legs correctly either. So I want to make sure I'm quite long in my stance here. I'm going to take my rear foot, place it on the bench, and my ankle here should be able to, if you look from the side here, ankle should be able to pivot down the front here. So if I'm too far back and I'm pivoting on my shin, that's not right. I want to have it just so the top of my foot's on the bench and my ankle can pivot down over the front here. Now the length of my stance here should be such that when I actually drop down, my lead knee doesn't end up going too far forwards here. So if I'm too close, I'm kind of doing this kind of action, my knee's coming forwards. What I want to do is make sure that's forwards so I can sink down behind that knee, get a good stretch into this rear hip. I'm trying to get that hip lower than knee or at the knee, and then drive up from there and come back up through again. Once I've got this position kind of worked out, I'm then going to load it with my dumbbells. So if I grab those, I'm just going to hold these down at the sides here. So place my foot, get my foot on the rear bench there. I might have to hop around a little bit to find where I need to be. After that first rep, I might find that I need to move as well. So from here now, chest up, keeping the lower back neutral, packing the chin just a little bit, drop down, keep that knee out, don't let it buckle in, keep it out, drive up, come back through again. So down to the bottom, driving up, and I'm squeezing the back side, and I feel like I'm pushing the floor away as I do my repetitions here. That's the rear foot elevated split squat.
This protocol works so well because it addresses all three elements of mobility. 1. Muscle length due to trigger points. Those knots in your muscles that build up because you're training hard and getting kicked in the thighs. 2. Range of motion due to the joint capsule itself, how the bones are positioned relative to each other. 3. Neuromuscular control, what your brain tells your body is a usable range of motion. These 3-part mobility exercises can be used before a training session as part of your warm-up, helping you to move correctly and anchor great movement habits in the rest of your session. And this anchoring of neuromuscular control is a big player in giving you mobility that your body can really use. And creating the best movement possible is fundamental to both injury reduction and performance enhancement. It's well worth your time and effort. These release and open exercises are also useful as active recovery between weight training sets that can use that range of motion to then anchor it and make it more permanent. Alternatively, you can make it into a recovery session by combining release, open and anchor exercises for various different parts of your body: hamstrings, adductors, shoulders, thoracic spine, etc. Although, don't do all of this stuff just for the sake of it, only if it's necessary. Testing your range of motion to find what you need to work on, like my sitting back onto your heels test, or going by feedback from movement or any localized restriction or pain that you may feel, should inform your choice of exercise programming. This then targets your personal limiting factors and 80/20s your training to focus on the vital few rather than the trivial many.